Europe was accustomed to protection but unprepared for the day their patrons switched to a fee-based model. Trump did not hide his intention to put the EU through its toughest challenge since the Cold War. He did so through actions that exposed every weakness of this old continent. In this game, the EU faced the harsh truth for the first time. In decisive moments, their fate was not in their hands. When Donald Trump returned to the White House, Brussels fell into what European diplomats call a silent storm. Not the sound of bombs, not an immediate economic crisis, but a pervasive sense of insecurity spread across EU where leaders once believed they understood how America operated. But Trump's return proved that belief was an illusion. Washington was no longer the stable pillar Europe had relied on for 3 decades. Instead, Trump's America saw Europe as a burden, a pointless expense, and a partner to be disciplined, not indulged. From the first weeks of his re-inauguration, Trump stunned the EU with a series of blunt statements, demanding NATO countries increase their defense budgets by 1.5 or double. No American president had ever spoken so directly before. Typically, such sensitive demands were conveyed discreetly through internal meetings or diplomatic channels. But Trump, true to style, chose to publicly break tradition, putting the EU on camera for the world to see. Like children refusing to do their homework. The war in Ukraine further heightened the tension. The EU had built an image as a pillar of support for Kiev, the loudest voice for democracy, independence, and against Russian aggression. But deep down, European capitals understood they were the weaker party in this game. Money could be poured in, but the defense industry couldn't miraculously produce missiles and artillery in just a few months. And America, whether willing or not, remained the source of modern weapons that Ukraine almost entirely had, and Trump understood that better than anyone. He knew Europe's weakness lay in talking more than acting and relying on America more than they admitted. He knew that merely closing the door slightly on support for Ukraine would put the EU in an unprecedented. With Ukraine as a battlefield of honor, they couldn't let Russia win, yet unable to turn the tide on their own. The moment considered the greatest humiliation in EU diplomacy occurred when Trump called some European leaders directly and said Washington no longer wanted to pay the bill indefinitely. But what shocked people more wasn't the words themselves, but that Trump let the American press report it before the EU Foreign Ministry received any official notification. Just a breach of diplomatic protocol, it was Trump. America wanted the EU to know who held it. From that moment, the EU understood this term was no longer about allied cooperation. This was a game where Trump set the rules, the timing, and the price. And the EU, whether annoyed or furious, was forced to play. To understand the harsh game Trump imposed on the EU, one must look deeply into how he built his strategy. Unlike traditional presidents who used soft diplomatic tools, Trump operated like a businessman, observing weaknesses, identifying interests, and forcing partners to make choices unfavorable to themselves. With Europe, he found 3 fatal weaknesses: security dependence, internal divisions, and illusion. The first weakness, security dependence, was the foundation of Trump's entire strategy. For decades, the EU thrived economically but lacked autonomous defense capabilities. Germany prided itself on industrial strength but lacked France was a nuclear power but its defense industry couldn't produce. Poland was enthusiastic but small, and other countries lived entirely under the NATO umbrella built by America. When Trump said he might let Russia do whatever it wanted to some NATO countries that didn't, all of Europe was shocked, not because they doubted the legality of the statement, but because they knew he was. If America withdrew its protection, the EU couldn't defend its borders with it. Well, in Trump's eyes, this is an opportunity. He not only wants countries to increase their defense spending but also wants them to buy America. This is entirely consistent with his thinking. Security must be linked with economic. If the US protects Europe, Europe must contribute to the US defense industry. This is something the EU finds extremely difficult to accept because it forces them to become more deeply but they also cannot refuse because the EU is not capable of quickly producing modern weapons on its own. The second weakness is internal division. Trump sees the cracks in the EU as a strategic map. Germany wants to maintain trade relations with China, while France wants to build. The Netherlands wants the US to tighten restrictions on Russia more strongly, while Italy and Hungary. Trump understood that with the right pressure, the EU would be unable to form a unified position. And he does that by attacking the Ukraine issue, the issue that makes the EU most likely to. By revealing the ability to negotiate quickly or reduce support, Trump creates instability that forces the EU to constantly scramble to keep the US in a game. The irony is that this dependence makes the EU appear even weaker in the eyes of Washington. Instead of acting as a strong alliance, Europe appears as a collection of countries constantly afraid of being abandoned by the United States. And this very fear diminishes the EU's voice in every negotiation with Trump. That made the diplomatic humiliation even more painful. The EU believes it is the third pole in a multipolar world, that they can balance between the US and China, that they play a central role in global issues such as the environment, human rights, and trade. But when Trump reappeared, all those illusions collapsed. In reality, on hot issues such as Ukraine, energy security, supply chains, and trade wars, the EU, Trump has realized what many EU leaders are unwilling to admit. Europe's main strength is economic power, not strategic power. When crisis erupts, money cannot replace missiles, diplomacy cannot, and declare that neutrality cannot replace air defense shields. Trump used this truth like a blade, cutting into the EU's pride in a cruel yet precise manner. In that context, Ukraine became a measure exposing Europe's complete dependence. When the US slows down aid, the EU immediately falls into a state of weapons, while signaling a desire to push for negotiations. Europe was immediately forced. The bitterest thing is that the EU wants the war to continue until Ukraine regains its sovereignty. But they do not have enough power to ensure that. The fate of Ukraine and the prestige of the EU lie entirely in Trump's hands, not Soviet NATO and Ukraine. Trump also expanded the game to the trade sector. He wants to renegotiate agreements with Europe to reduce the import of EU goods and increase energy. Therefore, the EU has developed a production sector and tightened taxes on German electric vehicles. With Trump, security and trade always go hand in hand. And the EU understands that if these conditions are not met, they will have difficulty accessing the American market. This could cause severe damage to the economies of Germany. Europe may be outraged, but they have no better choice. If they resist America, they will lose security. If they concede, they will lose. And the most painful thing is that they are forced to concede in silence, because they do not have enough strength to confront Washington. All of this makes for a stark truth. Trump is not weakening the EU. He only made the EU see a long-standing weakness. And this very awakening is the greatest humiliation of European diplomacy. For decades, they realized their true position was not that of the deal. They are not co-creators of the rules either, but merely passive participants in the game established by the US. In a world full of fluctuations, that truth is not only painful but also potent, because if the EU cannot overcome this shock, they will continue to fall into a state of strategic dependence, exactly as Trump desires. Please subscribe to the Arcane Atlas channel so you don't miss the latest videos.
Subscribe to the Go channel to follow exciting videos.
Like the journey? Subscribe and join the next expedition.